their interim final rule on obligation. And it is in effect. It became effective immediately. So John Williams is going to talk about what that means. And then at the end, we would really like to have a discussion with all of you about how you think this may impact your SFRF projects. We do have an opportunity to make public comment. So we will have a discussion to make sure that we can share everything that we can with Treasury in the hopes that the things that we're not going to work out, that maybe they'll change their minds on it. So, John, take it away.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, what we've been waiting for a long time is some clarification on obligation and what it means, and we have been provided some clarification of what it means, so that's good news. Just to get everybody's feet planted firmly on the ground, the issue is interpreting what Congress meant in the American Rescue Plan Act when they said that the SFRF funds and also the local fiscal recovery funds are only to cover costs incurred by December 31, 2024. So the challenge that Treasury had and that we have is to interpret what costs incurred means. So what Treasury did was they released an interim final rule and a final rule that said costs incurred means an obligation. And that definition has now been expanded as of November 20th with a new obligation interim final rule that will wait to become final. And we have that opportunity to make a public comment filed on or before December 20th of 2023. Ding. That's my signal to Andy to advance the slide. So on the left is the obligation definition that Treasury released in 2021 for the first time, and it said that an obligation was an order placed for property and services and entering into contract subawards and similar transactions that require payment. And what they've added to that is just a single sentence, but they've also added a lot of interpretive guidance. The single sentence that they added is over on the right and is underlined, and it says an obligation also means a requirement under federal law or regulation or provision of the award terms and conditions to which a recipient becomes subject as a result of receiving or expending funds. And you'll see what that means in just a moment. Slide. Andy, ding. Now, the first thing to point out from their guidance is that they said they heard everybody's recommendation that a budget appropriation or allocation should count as an obligation from the recipient standpoint, and they announced that they were rejecting that suggestion, that it allowed for too much variability and would not allow for any standard interpretation of what would constitute an obligation. So that's off the table. We all hoped it would be on the table. It's off the table. Next slide, Andy. But what they did announce is that subrecipients and contractors are not subject to the obligation deadline once the subaward is in place. So that is fantastic news from Treasury, because we have billions of dollars that will be subawarded, whether it's to local governments or to nonprofits. They do not have to obligate their funds at that level under this new definition or the existing definition of what an obligation is. It's only the state as prime recipient that has to have documentation in place to obligate the use of funds as of December 31st of 2024. So that was a big unanswered question, and we got exactly the answer we hoped for. Slide. Now, here's what that extra sentence covers, which is we get to count as obligations the money that we have to spend to comply with federal regulations in 2025 and 26, and during the closeout period in 2027, and record retention costs and things like that on into the future. And they enumerate the things that they think are obvious that are included. There may be other things that are included as we identify them, but all the money spent for reporting and compliance requirements, including activity for subrecipient monitoring, the cost of single audit, costs associated with record retention and internal controls, property standards, which may mean that if you're buying equipment and things that need to be maintained or insured, things like that, the property standard expenses are assumed to be counted. The cost of environmental compliance, and the costs of civil rights and non-discrimination requirements. So all those are assumed to be obligations that are made before the end of 2024. We do have to put those into a budget estimate format in early 2025. In early 2024. So expect some guidance from us so that we can come up with a common methodology to forecast what those administrative expenses will be. We'll be filing those with Treasury early in the year and give them chance to give us feedback before 2024 runs out and that obligation deadline actually kicks in. Slide. Now, this was an area that we had a lot of questions about. What happens after 2024 if something goes wrong with your contract or subaward? What if a recipient goes bankrupt? What if they can't perform? What if? And Treasury said, as long as everybody's acting in good faith, when things go wrong in 2025 and 2026, you can re-obligate that money, but it is fairly specific and fairly narrow. Number one, if the recipient, that's us, as prime recipient, the state, determined that a subawardee or a contractor is in default or has gone out of business or is unable to perform satisfactorily, you can de-obligate and re-obligate that money. Going to have a good paper trail to show that all this was done in good faith. The second thing is very interesting. If there's a mutual agreement to terminate an award or a contract for convenience, you can re-obligate it. Now, normally in federal contracting law, termination for convenience just means the government has decided that its convenience means it wants to change direction and cancel the contract. So it remains to be seen how wide a door that is, but it would require both sides to agree to cancel that contract. But that does open the door to re-obligating the money. And finally, if the recipient determines in good faith that the intended subrecipient or contractor was actually ineligible to receive the money, if there was some impropriety in the way the award was made, or if there was just a defect in the selection or award process, you can correct those errors or mistakes in 2025 and 26. They specifically note that change orders will not be allowed. So, for example, in a construction contract, it is not unusual to find some new requirement or desirable requirement that was not apparent at the outset that becomes desirable later, and you just authorize a change order be put in place. That is not an approved use of funds. That would count as a new obligation that's prohibited by this deadline. So that's important to know. There's a link here when we distribute the slides, or you can go onto the Treasury homepage, and there's a kind of a quick, snappy outline of what these things are. Or you can read the full Federal Register text, which works out to 6 pages of very small print that has the full commentary from Treasury and the new sentence that has been added to the rule. Slide. So this still leaves us with some unanswered questions. They've given us some good answers that are very firm guidance, but we have some unanswered questions. For example, are state administrative compliance costs eligible obligations for 2025 and 26? And that's especially an important question with revenue replacement projects where we're already exempted from many federal regulatory compliance issues. Because that original rule talks about similar transactions that require payment, it seems like they're anticipating that things like regular administration of state funds through our internal controls and our internal processes would be within the scope of what they would consider administrative compliance requirements, as long as they weren't written especially to utilize this federal money, but they are the way we normally manage federal money or state money. I think it will be included, but we would really like to have Treasury say so out loud and in print. Number 2, at what point are revenue replacement projects for government services obligated if they're not federal subawards? Remember, the commentary and the language refers to contracts and subawards, and the commentary talks about subrecipients. But when you're doing a revenue replacement project, Treasury has also said that is never a federal subaward when it goes to a non-state entity because it's not implementing a program or a project that was designed by the federal government. It's basically giving funds to the state to design its own projects for its own purposes. So we need to know, does this extend to the same kind of rules extend to the revenue replacement projects, which I'll remind you take up about 60% of the state's money. We think, or at least I think, that will count as similar transactions that require payment. But when all the guidance talks about subrecipients and subawards and contractors, they did not go so far as to say that revenue replacement projects that are not federal subawards still are similar transactions that require payment. Another question is there a way to structure our project documentation to allow for adjustments in 2025 and 26 for variations in cost and performance? The kind of the mind experiment that we keep thinking about is water and sewer projects, where we have a tremendous number of projects among multiple local governments, and they're still scoping out their cost estimates, their engineering requirements, and we think that will be a moving target for a long time as local governments see what will be required, and how they can utilize and leverage other federal funds, and that might affect the scope of what's undertaken. How can we build in some kind of flexibility to use those funds? Obviously, Congress wants water and sewer built. They want broadband infrastructure built, but these are going to be massively complicated projects, and you wouldn't want the fragmentation of the projects to result in funds being unused in 2025 and 26, when you could load balance the expenditure rates between different projects as they go forward. So we want to have some better understanding of that. As I look at this language, this termination for convenience guidance could open a door to handle that, but that would require the mutual cooperation of all the parties entitled to the funds to say, we've decided to shrink the size of this project, and then we might have the opportunity to reobligate those monies to another project. But again, I think it would be foolish of us to assume that Treasury will authorize that, but I think they've given us some vocabulary to ask the question in a sharper way to see if those kind of adjustments can be allowable in 2025 and 26, and what kind of documentation needs to be in place to make sure that is lawful. And next slide. So, Stephanie, I'll turn it back to you to lead a discussion about our concerns, potential impacts, and other information we may need to know as we fashion our public comments. As you'll see on the next slide, I'd love to have those things in by the end of next week, the 15th. I'm sorry, 2 weeks, 15th, so that we can compile those the week after and have them ready for filing by the 20th.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks for walking us through the guidance. It is in effect now and under the interim final rule, but we know Treasury's been willing to make some changes under the final rule. I will just candidly say that we are working with all of our partners who work with local governments to make sure that they are expressing their concerns as well. So one of the things that we wanted to talk with you about today is, what concerns do you have? I know you're hearing it for the first time. So for some of you, you may need to take it and, think about it. What concerns do you have with this new guidance? What impacts do you think it may have on your allocations? And is there any information you want to share with us so that we can share it with public comment with Treasury in our public comment response? So I can go ahead and tell you what we've heard from DEQ so far, which is that they're concerned, as John noted, with being able to move money between projects. If some of these infrastructure projects come in below budget, we would forfeit, under the current terms, we would forfeit any money that we saved and wouldn't be able to easily move that to another project that may be over budget. Many of you I know are under revenue replacement. I'm a little concerned with the way the guidance is written, that the money isn't automatically obligated once we declared it revenue replacement, which is a little inconsistent in terms of how Treasury, we report to Treasury, and so far we haven't been able to get them to answer that question directly. I will tell you that we are meeting with other states and Treasury with the National Association of State Budget Officers on December 14th, and Treasury is coming. We have to get our questions to them by December 4th. They don't have the best track record of answering our questions live and in person, but we are hoping that they will this time. So if you, okay, good. Thank you, Steve. The same concern for DNCR. Yes. I appreciate that. And yes, Tommy noted something very important. We have learned, so U.S. Treasury and the state and local fiscal recovery funds has new management. They have the leadership that moved over from emergency rental assistance. And they have talked about how the more they hear the same concerns, the more likely they are to respond to them. So we would encourage you to submit your comments under guidance, and we will make sure you have the link so that we'll put it separately in the email that we send out following this email with the slides in it, so that you can send your comments to them directly. And then also, if you'll make sure you send your comments to us so that we have them in our response. So it'll be in our response, it'll be in your response. Steve, I would say for like the state parks, if those are in, if we know, I think we do know which state parks they are and which local areas they are, we should let the COGS and the league and the association know as well so that they can express those concerns. I know that'll have a big local impact for people too. So we just want to make sure that we're as consistent and we're bombarding them with as many of our concerns as possible. Again, some of this guidance is great. We're really thrilled after 2 years that they finally gave us some guidance, but it does create some concerns for us as well. Any other things that people want to share or put in the chat? That's a good question, Daryl. Does it have any relevance to our beneficiaries, the science museums, and the grant program? We don't think it will impact them. Treasury says in a different part of their guidance that if it's revenue replacement, they don't consider that there are any subawards. And then obviously the way they treat beneficiaries is different than the way they treat subrecipients. So I don't think so. But again, it's something that we would like to have them explicitly talk about and say, this doesn't have any impact on your beneficiaries. This doesn't have any impact on your revenue replacement dollars. And so far, they haven't been willing to do that. Go ahead, John.
Daryl, do we anticipate that there would be any beneficiary payments that would be delayed until after the end of 2024? Because they do not have to show that they've utilized the money. But I'm just curious whether there's a delay in transferring the payment outward.
Daryl's typing, so why he's doing
Okay.
that. Greer has put, okay, we're about halfway through. Okay, thanks, Daryl. Greer said, to make sure I understand correctly, if we have revenue replacement funds, are we still questioning whether our subrecipients are subject to the December 2024 deadline? It's unclear. I don't think they are, based on the fact that they came out and said subrecipients are not subject to the obligation deadline. So we're 90% confident in that. But Treasury's been squirrely and hasn't answered our questions about revenue replacement in general and obligation. So I don't think it's going to impact the subrecipients in any way, shape, or form. Once state agencies as a prime recipient have said, you've entered into an agreement, this money is obligated, you're fine. But there are some inconsistencies in their guidance that make us a little bit nervous.
It would be such an easy thing for them to say in a sentence that those are similar transactions that require payment. And they have plenty of paper to say it on in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, they just aren't they're not answering our questions, and we've tried. They had 2 webinars, which is why we canceled our meeting 2 weeks ago, because it was during the Treasury webinar, and they wouldn't answer. Okay, any other chat or comments? This is not your last opportunity. Okay, so planned administration costs. That is a good question, Steve. So his question is, so planned administrative costs such as salaries to administer a grant project in 2025 and 2026 for revenue replacements are allowable or not? We think the answer is yes. But we're going to have to submit, they're going to make us do extra paperwork right now. We're going to have to submit findings and some kind of calculation. I can't remember how they phrased it, in March or April of 2024 to get it approved. And that's, again, where we find some of the inconsistencies. In the way we report revenue replacement. Basically, once you said this was our revenue loss and we're going to use these funds for government services in our reports, we have to consider them 100% obligated. Our preference would be that they just say if it's revenue replacement, it's 100% obligated, regardless of administration cost, regardless of states using it for whatever other government service, regardless of whether or not it's a subrecipient. But so far, we can't get Treasury to come out and say that definitively.
Yeah, they have previously said that personnel costs are to be treated as obligations. They understand that we don't have individual contracts in place with each individual employee that we can count on for this whole period. But we look at personnel costs as a line item, and they've recognized that as an eligible obligation. But we still will have to forecast that, which means we also may have to forecast things like what we think the legislature may do in salary adjustments or what other things as part of our budgeting exercise. So the more flexibility, the better, but it would be nice to have a good methodology for that that's acceptable. Let us be exacting with it or give us some flexibility to use those funds as needed.
So thank you for these questions. We will send you the link directly for public comments for Treasury. Also, if you will send your comments to John, we will put them together so that we can talk with Treasury and again submit, as a whole. And then I know Lee and Jim McCluskey and others are working on other ways for us to submit comments because this, it seems like they're making making it much harder to do our jobs than it should be. They've touted the American Rescue Plan and its policy purpose and, helping us recover and other states recover from the pandemic. We have held up our end of the bargain, and now we would like for them to not make it administratively more difficult for us to do our jobs. So that's going to be our focus here. And again, we appreciate your clarifying questions. And I'm sorry that I feel like every answer we've given you is we're not really sure, it's not completely clear. Because in classic Treasury style, it's not completely clear. All right. So keep the questions coming. Email directly John, myself, your grants manager, and we appreciate it. And Andy and Natalie are going to go next to talk about performance measures.
All right, out of Treasury guidance into performance. Two favorite topics I know for everyone. So I want to start off by, as I have before, thanking you all for your engagement in this process. I know it's been some tough sledding at times. It's a very iterative process, a lot of back and forth, and really working together to identify what appropriate measures will be. And I know everyone's approached this with tremendous thought and attention to details, and just want to say thank you collectively for your work on that. and want to give you an update on where we are, and then Natalie will share some of what you can expect next of all this. So just a quick snapshot up top on where we are. So in total, of the projects that have requirements to develop and finalize KPIs, we've completed the interviews with the consultative interviews with over 70% of the projects, and those 70% of the projects represent over 85% of the total funds. So we're continuing to make good progress on this. What I want to draw attention to, and that's so that the top chart here, top bar is measured by percent of funds that are at the different steps in the process, and the bottom is is based on number of projects. I didn't break down what each individual step is, but the general idea is that we want to see all the projects move over to the right in that dark blue, the darkest blue. That middle section, which represents the biggest chunk of projects, are in the stage where we've had the interview with the leads for that particular project, and NCPRO has followed up in providing the notes from that interview, and we're just the gap between finishing up that step to getting you to that last bit of the process where you're in that darkest blue category, is for you all to submit those notes back to us, so we can do a final review and hopefully get that programmed into our system on the back end. And Natalie will talk a bit more about that. And then so I just want to highlight here that on the right then, so what we're considering for these purposes as KPIs being finalized is that NCPRO and your the project lead for the various projects, and we know many of the projects are bundled together, that there are usually more projects, multiple projects per person who we're meeting with. But based on number of projects, we're considering it finalized when we have mutually agreed that these are the final set of KPIs based on this step, based on where we are in this in the arc of this process, and that we're programming into our back end what those final KPIs are, so we can move on toward actual data collection. And then that's where the real fun begins, which is the data collection and analysis. So that's the big steps here. Just continuing to move folks along. And I'll turn it over to Natalie to talk a little bit about some of the process steps and follow up.
Hi, I hope everyone's having a great day. I apologize, I'm not on camera. My internet is giving me a little trouble today, so I hope you can hear me all right. So just a few process reminders. As Andy said, about 52% of our projects that are developing KPIs are sort of stuck in that limbo awaiting follow-up phase. And that means we've had our interview, which those have been going really well. We really appreciate your cooperation and collaboration on those. They've been largely productive and enjoyable process. So yeah, largely about 52% are stuck in that sort of limbo follow-up phase. So just a reminder that KPIs can only be finalized with your input. You are the experts on your projects. We're just here to sort of provide support, but your input is key to developing really solid KPIs for your projects. So if you are sort of in that limbo stage, please provide any KPI follow-up info as soon as you're able. We understand some folks may still have some lingering questions. If that's the case, feel free to reach out to your grants manager, and I or another member of our reporting team are happy to jump on a call with you and your grants manager and answer any questions that you have, or sort of massage any any KPIs that you're feeling a little bit doubtful about. So feel free to just communicate on those points if that's what the holdup is. So once your project KPIs are finalized, you will receive an initial data request to capture all of the data related to activities that occurred before this point. So it's sort of, we're calling that the backlog data request, where you will just give us all of the data that's occurred since the beginning of your project. And then after that, ongoing data collection will begin in early 2024, sort of based on those reporting intervals that you've told us. So in some cases, folks are reporting quarterly. In some cases, it's a semi-annual reporting period. In some cases, it's annual. So those we allowed our recipients to determine based on their understandings of the project. So that's sort of what to expect from here on out. We're going to try to get all of these KPIs finalized with your input. You'll report backup data, and then you'll be getting sort of those regular data requests until your project is wrapped up. So I hope that just is a quick refresher that's helpful to folks. If you have any questions, please reach out to your grants manager, and we all kind of work as a team to follow up with you. So thank you so much so far, though. Everything has been running along, and we're making a lot of progress. So we really appreciate your work. Thank you.
Okay, well, that is all that we have for today. If you go to the next slide, you can see that I know many of you have been engaged in the CRF desk review that has been underway since September 1st. We keep hearing from the auditors that we're getting closer to the end, but they keep sending us lots more samples and very detailed data that we need to pull for them. So at our next meeting, NCPRO and 4 of our state agencies who have been very much involved in that are going to talk about our experiences. All indications point that this is going to be a similar process for state fiscal recovery funds. And so we are going to start working now to get us ready for that, that level of scrutiny that we expect to be coming from Treasury. So I just want to tee that up for you. That'll be on December 14th. And other than that, we're going to spend the rest of the time having office hours. So if you have questions for your NCPRO team, let us know. We'll be here. Thank you so much for your time today. All right. Anybody have any questions? You can raise your hand virtually, or you can just let us know in general. Speak up.